Hello guys, welcome to the next chapter. Here we're going to talk about comparison. Comparison is a extremely powerful technique that will basically help us to realize the difference between each positions, the difference between some move orders, and the difference between some things that will happen to us when we are calculating. Basically, that looks very similar, but they are not. With comparison, what we want to do is learn from the lines that we are playing, try to figure out the best order of all that stuff. Basically, comparing some different lines that might look similar, but they have some differences, and trying to learn from them. Okay, so we can do this in, of course, very many different ways. And for instance, this position here is one very interesting position for using comparison. Here I was white against Grandmaster Jordan Van Forest that was playing with the black pieces, and it's a very complicated position. Of course, both kings are totally destroyed. There is a rook hanging, there is this guy hanging, this guy's weak, this guy's weak. There is so many possibilities, so many moves, and it's actually not so easy to spot what the best move is. So let's start slowly. Let's start to do the plunger technique, then we'll do candidate, and then we'll try to compare the different moves and try to learn from them. So as you see, slowly we're going to be implementing each of the techniques that we are learning. So first, plunger techniques, let's realize this guy. So what is happening? Which king is worse? Okay, black is to play our king. There is some check here, but we can go here. Doesn't seem so terrible. Let's say that our king is kind of safe for now. This guy, okay, seems that bishop b7 is almost made. So this guy is definitely very weak. And also this file might be able to be used with some rook ga or some gf5. So this is something also to have in our mind. Pieces that are weak, okay. Everything, right? This guy's weak, 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 this guy's weak. Everything is weak. So this is kind of a mess. And there is also very important thing we have to realize in this position. Even in some endgames, black might be winning if this guy end up being alive. These are the most important things to realize in this position. King safety, the ideas of mating, and trying to make the pawn on a2 alive if we reach some endgame, which seems kind of not possible to stop because white's going to play queen d4 next almost no matter what. So basically what black needs to do here is to either mate the white king or enter an endgame with the a2 pawn surviving. Okay, in order to do that, which are the most natural moves here for black? So I would say that my candidate moves will be bishop b7, and to be honest, after considering bishop b7, it will be already so hard for me to try to believe some other move is better than that, because it will be not so human. But actually, this is one of those cases where the engines are much better than the humans, right? So bishop b7 is a very interesting move. Another move that makes a lot of sense is rook g8, but this is definitely not an easy move to make, trying to create some counterplay. And another move that black can consider, but only after a lot of thoughts, and we'll actually tell it later. Well, as I said, we'll tell it later. So let's start with bishop b7, because it seems so attractive that it will be very hard for me to start with other moves. Okay, bishop b7, threatening mate. Possibilities for white there. Okay, first move we'll have to calculate. Of course, the check, we'll have to calculate rook e7, because again, what is going on with our king? But it actually seems that after king d6, we'll have to calculate again something like rook b7. So I suddenly say, okay, here, rook b7. This guy? What's happening with this guy? If I take here, king will take. My king will be extremely bad placed. So okay, I cannot go for this. This is losing for me. But suddenly I realized that, okay, but after bishop b7, my king was actually not so nice, but now has a new square. And after rook e7, black can actually play king c8. King is still under threat, and the king now is after queen d4. The king is not pinned anymore. So queen d4, I simply give mate. So there's actually no room for attack here for white. There's some checks, like queen c1 is check, but bishop c5, no more checks, game is over. So rook e7, king c8 is winning, but it's important to realize that king d6, rook b7 is losing for me. And also important to see that after rook b7, I can simply take, and then if he takes, I'll change and I'll enter some endgame that at least will be much better for me. I might not know if he's winning or not, but it's much better. I don't need to end up calculating till then. So okay, I know rook e7 is not working, so let's go. Bishop e7, queen d4, take on d4, take on d4. Okay, how can I make this guy survive? So the first instinct will actually be to play rook e8, because after rook e8 takes and rook e8 takes, if white takes, there is mate here. I know the position is complicated, so I'll make the moves. So bishop b7, queen d4, take, rook e8, take. Now white cannot take because there is mate here, and black will manage to defend with bishop d5. And it will be not so easy to realize that after, let's say, f4, trying to play king f2 and bishop d5, black should win this. It might not be so simple, you might need still to make some careful moves, but it seems so nice. With a pawn on a2 that is basically controlling all the white pieces, it seems so hard for white to survive this. Also with the king that is extremely unsafe, it's not rook to come. So okay, let's say this is winning. But suddenly we might realize that here, white has an extra option, which is bishop e3, that's extremely strong. And the idea with bishop e3 is that now there is no threats here, and the key is that if we play bishop d5, now he can pin it, rook d1, and if you play king c6, actually you might end up losing because bishop is hanging. So here, black is losing the pawn. So what I did learn from this, I have to try to make this happening, this bishop d5 happening, without allowing bishop e3, because if the bishop is on e3 down, there is one new possibility, that the rook on d1 will pin my bishop. So this is very important thing to know and very important thing to realize here. Okay, so we go back, and here actually, if we learn from that, if we compare that with other possibilities, we might realize, not easy, but we might realize that actually rook g8 is winning. And it's so hard to realize why. It's so hard, like in a game, extremely hard to realize why. But the truth is that if f6, which seems so nice, it seems so normal, because now even the rook is going to e7, now the g file will not be open, what will be the difference? So hard to spot actually. So the key is that after rook g8, if we go to the same variation, again, of course, if he takes, same thing, I will defend here. This guy's coming, if he takes mate. If he plays bishop e3, or if I play bishop e3, bishop d5, and rook e1, we compare, now the pawn is here, now this square is not controlled, now black can play king e6, and suddenly position is totally won, because I managed to defend the pawn, and now I simply will bring my rook to c2, and slowly will win the game, because this guy is defended. Of course, very a Newman way to play, very hard to realize that rook h8 was winning, because you forced pawn on f6, which seems to be better for white, but actually it's worse, because the e6 square is extremely important. Very hard, there we can see comparison. But there is more of this in all these lines. So this line is of course important, but then white can also think and say, okay, so if the problem was if I take and play rook e8, there is bishop e3, they can say, okay, but I can start with rook e8, and then only after rook takes, I will take, and if he takes, I take, and there is no rook here, so I basically am fooling them. So I will have to compare, and again, try to realize the difference. Another difference is that after rook d1, he can take with check and not with bishop. Again, another thing that we need to compare, right? So let's go back, and let's imagine that bishop b7, queen d4, rook g8 is very hard to spot, and we simply don't spot it. So then I keep thinking, and I might say, okay, what if I'm very annoyed by this f6 idea? What if I start with rook g8, right? So actually rook g8 is winning, but again, very hard to realize. Idea is that if we take on d4, check, now we win a tempo, and queen takes d4, and bishop e7. Again, very hard. Idea now, we are threatening bishop d5, there is also some bishop g2 idea, and white cannot take here, because after here, I'm coming to c4, b3, take, and bishop c4, check. Again, very hard to realize all of this. So, if we go back, rook g8 is winning, bishop e7 is winning, and there is even one more move that is winning, but it's also not so easy, which is rook e8, which is probably the move that applying comparison will be the easy one to calculate. Why? It's very easy to calculate now that if queen d4, rook e1 takes, and now bishop e7, here it's very easy to realize that the a2 pawn will not be hanging without calculating so much. Bishop d5 is coming, black simply won here. But it will not be so easy to realize that after rook e8 takes, queen d4, take, again here, black is winning. It seems so hard to win this, but again, bishop b7, bishop d5 is coming, king is out of the pins, and if he takes, rook d8, and now the background mate is coming. So many different possibilities were winning, but many of them were extremely hard, we could learn from some of the normal human ideas and somehow convert them in some kind of engine idea that end up working. As you see, there is some of the moves that were working. Any of them were easy, even though there were more moves winning than making draw. It was very, very hard to see any of them. Now we're going to go with position number 2, which is actually much simpler than the first one. And we have this kind of Sicilian position where definitely white is having some advantage. He has some space, he has some activity. Also, black king is still not castle. So it seems that something might be happening. But also, it's one of those positions that when we have it with whites, we probably know that if we want to do something, it's probably better to do something quick, because it's this kind of position where if black somehow managed to hold, in the long term, their position will probably be quite nice, because they have the pair of bishop, they have not really so much weaknesses, so we probably have to do something fast. So I will of course consider, as always, chess, captures, and threats. Do I have checks? Not really. Do I have captures? I have some captures. Knight e6. Takes, queen h5, g6. Okay, not really working, right? So let's go for threats. Let's go for weaknesses. Let's see what is weak and what is happening. Okay, this guy, weak, not defended. In general, this part of the board, quite weak. If he castle, there's not so much pieces defending. Knight can come, but it's not still there. Also, open file, nobody control. My rook on e1 is not doing so much, so it will make sense to go here. But also, I don't know, because the rook on e1, at some point if this thing opens up, it might make some sense to have it there. And actually, just by thinking that, another move might suddenly come to my mind. I will say, okay, 95, make a lot of sense, right? If he takes, I take, suddenly attacking. Seems so nice. Totally this line is losing because he can castle. No, he takes a bishop, but he can play knight f6, knight f5, and knight d5. Depending here, nothing happens, but still we have to calculate. So, here, more moves. A move that actually seems so nice for me and a move that I will definitely calculate is f5. f5 makes a lot of sense. It's hitting one of the, let's say, weak spot of black position. Is trying to open up the position. Is trying to use the fact that the king is on e8. So I would say, okay, f5. If he don't do anything and I take, I win a pawn. Not so much to calculate. f5. If he takes, I take with the knight. Not really need to calculate anything. I made my structure better. I make him create some weaknesses. My knight is better placed. My rook are more active. So, okay, no need to calculate anything. So f5, e5, only move. By elimination, I know e5 is only move. And also, f5, knight f8, again, I don't need to calculate anything. I know the knight there is not well placed. I don't need to calculate till then. It's enough to know that f5 is a nice move. Okay, f5, e5. Which move do I have there? So I have some kind of positional ideas, like I could go knight c2, knight e3, try to control this guy, try to go to g4, g5 if he ever puts a knight on e6, and this would probably be a nice position for white, and actually it's a nice position for white. But let's say I'm more creative, and I believe there is something happening here, and I really want to crush black position. And I start calculating knight e6, which is the kind of move that might end the game straight. From here, just end the game, right? So knight e6, of course, is forced for black to take, and then I have to consider whether I take or I give check first. So it will be kind of easy to consider after knight e6, take, knight f6, no checks on h5, guy is going to castle next, so makes not so much sense. So okay, knight e6, takes, check. Okay, if he goes to f8, I take here, check, there is mate on f7, there is everything, so I know this guy can never go to f8 because he's destroyed. So knight e6, take, check, king d8. I could calculate from far away, but it's not an easy position. I take here, I recover some material, my pieces are coming, this rook is coming to c1. Suddenly I realized that in that position I probably prefer the rook on c1, because if actually the e file is going to be closed, I probably prefer to have the rook on c1, right? This is something that I might learn from this line, right? So knight e6, takes, check, king d8, take. Let's go there. Knight f6 makes a lot of sense, trying to close the file, right? And suddenly I realized that after queen f7, black best idea, even though it's not an easy idea, might be to play queen c6, trying to bring the queen to e8 and try to defend everything. Like if I take here, rook here, for instance, back, and then queen e8, and then this guy will hold here. And position is not so simple. So I learned two things here. I learned that this queen is key to defend, because actually this king works somewhere else, probably black cannot move. So when I go back to the first position, when I already learned some things, I learned that my rook is helpful here if the file is open, but file is not going to be open. I learned that this queen is extremely important to the defense of that black king on e8. I learned that I want my rook on c1 on all these lines. So what if I just change the move order? What if I just play rook c1 first, and then I start calculating? Rook c1, okay. It's definitely creating some threats, and threatening some knight d5, some knight b5, some things are happening here and not so nice for black. So first things I will calculate, of course, first two natural moves, and actually only two natural moves for black. There is queen d8, or there is queen b8. So if we start with queen d8, that seems maybe having everything packed together, I realized very quickly that this square was very important, as I learned before, for the king. So after f5, e5, knight e6, takes check. Now there is no place to bring the king, right? 5, any move that is not e5, I know for a fact that is not nice. Knight f8, again, I don't need to calculate. I know I can make whatever, and this is definitely making black position worse because this guy I don't know where it's going. So e5, I go here, check, and there's no place to go. So he goes to f8, I simply take, and there's mate here. So I know black queen cannot go to d8. So queen b8 is solid move. And now f5. And again, I know this is not option, and I know e5 is only move. And if I go through the same line as I went before, 96, take, check, here, take, take, take. Now it's much different. This queen is not defending the bishop. This queen cannot go magically here. This rook cannot defend the pawn. If you go here, I can simply take, and then this guy is hanging. So basically, we'll have to play something like rook f8, take, rook g8. I could go back to f7. There is some other moves like queen a6 also good, but queen f7 is so strong, and threatening rook f6, rook f8 is only move, and now after take, take, and take, what's totally won because black cannot move. Knight d5 is coming, even I'm a rook down, this guy is hanging, and totally lost position for black. So what I want to know here is that by analyzing some line, I actually, even though I analyzed all of this, I didn't waste tempo, even though I didn't play that line at the end. Because what I did from that line was learning. I tried to, let's say, learn from some things from that line. I learned that the king should go to d8, not to f8. I learned that the queen might want to go to the defense. I learned that the e file will be closed in that kind of position, so my rook will not be so helpful on e1. I learned some things, and then I can use that stuff to apply it on other variation. So this is something you have to try to do when you are calculating. Try to change the move orders. Try to learn from your variation and use that ideas or those ideas in other similar position because they might work. This happens a lot when you are calculating. I already said it. Sometimes you have the right ideas, sometimes you know the right moves, but somehow you don't apply them in the right orders. And this in calculation might change everything most of the time. So be very careful with the orders. Try to learn from the lines, and this way you will compare lines and you will realize the difference and try to use them for you as best as possible. I hope you enjoyed the video and see you on the next one.
Access ChessEnigma's free sample lessons. Enjoy videos, interactive exercises, and a digital board to practice anywhere on any device. Sign up for free and start improving your chess from home today.